Hi, I'm Jane Velez-Mitchell with Jane Unchained, and today we're doing a pretty extraordinary roundtable with leaders in the animal rights movement about an absolutely gut-wrenching investigation conducted by the New York Times into the Agriculture Department's meat lab in Nebraska, a sprawling complex of more than 50 acres where their investigation revealed farm animals are routinely tortured. And I do not use that word lightly. I am talking about thousands upon thousands of farm animals left to die, left to starve to death, left to be ravaged by coyotes, and some anecdotes in this incredible, and I applaud it, New York Times investigation that are so horrifying that I have to say they amount to sheer sadism. Straight out to Nathan Runkle, the leader of Mercy for Animals. What was your reaction to this investigation, Nathan?
This facility, which is funded by U.S. taxpayers, can be described as nothing less than a house of horrors. Hats off to the New York Times for what should be an award-winning piece, really going in and looking at the torture in which hundreds of thousands of farm animals over the years have been subjected to at this U.S. Meat Animal Research Center. Lambs being left to freeze to death, to be killed by hail and predators, animals being torn up while still alive in vivisection experiments. It's just absolutely horrific. And to think that taxpayers are footing the bill for essentially research and development for a private industry, the meat industry, raises serious questions about misuse of tax dollars as well as the ethics of these types of experiments to begin with.
Donnie Moss of TheirTurn.net, you and I both reached out to the director of this U.S. Meat Animal Research Center. They basically did not respond. They said, we're forwarding our email. Your reaction to some of the horrors that were revealed in this New York Times article?
Jane, the first thing I thought is, shouldn't they be using our tax dollars to find ways to eliminate factory farming instead of expanding it and exacerbating it? I mean, given not only because factory farming is so destructive to the animals, but also from a public health perspective and from an environmental perspective, because nothing is worse for the environment than factory farming.
Well, indeed, what I found so extraordinarily ironic about all this, while the United States is suffering with an obesity crisis and a heart disease crisis, heart disease, the #1 killer, which of course is caused by the overconsumption of meat and dairy because it's clogged arteries from high cholesterol. Cholesterol is in animals. You don't get high cholesterol from plants. What I thought was so extraordinary about the justification for this torture is a scientist who was quoted, who used to work there, said, well, there's trade-offs. We've got to feed 9 billion people by 2050, and so something's we have to have trade-off. So to justify torturing animals, as opposed to saying, well, maybe the trade-off is meat itself, and let's give up meat because we obviously know the three of us don't eat meat. We're doing just fine, thank you, health-wise. We don't need meat to survive. All that grain could be used more efficiently to feed far more people. The hogging of resources to make a cow or a pig or a lamb is extraordinary. So the idea, Nathan, that they are justifying this torture by saying, well, we need to do it to feed people, it's like a double slap in the face.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. This is a facility that was set up 50 years ago, and it's operating with an old view. It's out of date, and absolutely, if the concern is feeding the world's growing population, we should be looking at plant production, plant protein, in the emerging arena of meat alternatives. If that is really the way in which we're going to feed this growing population, not through trying to manipulate animals into having twins or triplets or some of these other just barbaric experiments that are taking place at this house of horrors. So it's time that tax dollars be put towards looking for real solutions versus funding hideously cruel experiments that, quite frankly, are out of step with what most Americans would find acceptable. Again, hats off to the New York Times for pulling back the curtain on this facility that has been allowed to essentially torture animals for decades without any sort of public scrutiny. These researchers should be charged with animal cruelty, and this operation should be shut down immediately. Tax dollars should be moved towards more innovative, humane, and sustainable alternatives in feeding our nation's growing population.
I want to read one anecdote from the New York Times article, and of course we bring our mascots, our companion animals, with us on these chats to remind people of what we're talking about. We're talking about sentient beings who can feel terror and loneliness and fear. Listen to this. Months into his new job at the center, this doctor said he got a call from a fellow worker asking him to help with a downed cow. Now I'm going to quote from the article. There was a young cow, a teenager, with as many as 6 bulls, he recalled. The bulls were being studied for their sexual libido, and normally you would do that by putting a single bull in with a cow for 15 minutes. But these bulls had been in there for hours mounting her. The cow's head was locked in a cage-like device to keep her immobile, he said. Her back legs were broken. Her body was just torn up. Doctor, I'm not going to mention his name, wanted to euthanize the animal, but the scientist in charge could not be tracked down for permission. A few hours later, the cow died. I mean, this is horrific sadism with a sexual twinge. I have to say, after reading that, I feel that these people are sociopaths. I think they're mentally ill. They need to not only be charged with animal cruelty, but I think that they're sick. They're sick in the head. Donnie Moss.
Jane, what you just described goes on in factory farms all over the country every day, or all over the world, I should say, every day of the year. It's just that the New York Times shined a spotlight on what's happening at this particular facility. I think it was a missed opportunity for the New York Times to include a reference to the fact that factory farmers themselves were horrified by what they were seeing at this agricultural facility, because we all know that the abuses that animals endure in factory farms everywhere are every bit as bad as what goes on in this particular facility.
And first of all, I do want to say I congratulate the New York Times for doing this intensive investigation through the Freedom of Information Act, getting thousands of pages of documents, studying them. I think we have to give credit where credit is due for breaking the story, because now there's a huge outcry with all sorts of petitions saying shut this down, which we are going to get involved. Jane Unchained, and I'm sure Donnie, you'll jump in, and I'm sure Mercy for Animals is doing something, and I know Farm Sanctuary is doing something. We've got to shut this operation down. It is absolutely like some kind of Frankenstein house of horrors, and it really is an illustration of the moral bankruptcy of our country. And here's the thing that gets me. Nathan Runkle, the head of Mercy for Animals, this is under the umbrella of the USDA. The USDA is the agency that is charged with looking after animal welfare at slaughterhouses and laboratories. So these very people who are supposed to be protecting farm animals who have zero protection, they're running their own torture chamber.
Absolutely. It's a classic case of the fox guarding the hen house. And the New York Times story, I think, really is just the tip of the iceberg. And it really puts on the table some fundamental questions about our treatment and obligation to farmed animals. And if you read this article, you'll see that these animals, whether they be pigs or cows or lambs, are not treated as sentient individuals capable of feeling pain. They're really treated as meat-producing machines. The focus of how can they increase body weight, how can they increase litter size, really comes back to increasing profits for the meat industry at the expense of animal welfare. And if we look at the USDA, we see that while they are charged with the enforcement of the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, we also see huge deficiencies. Over 90% of the animals killed in slaughterhouses are chickens. They're not even covered under the Humane Slaughter Act. The article mentions the Animal Welfare Act. That completely excludes farmed animals, not just from research facilities like this one, but from all agriculture operations. There's not a single federal law that provides protection to animals during their miserable lives on these factory farms. So we are getting government handouts to perform research and development for the meat industry, yet that same money easily could be put into enforcement, regulation, oversight of factory farms and slaughterhouses that exist. Again, illustrating the fox guarding the hen house. Something needs to change very quickly.
As we wrap this up, I want to shut this down. I will make it my life's work to shut this torture. It's like a secret prison as far as I'm concerned. And we know that a lot of the torture that was inflicted on human beings started with studies that they did on animals. We've made that connection. Donnie Moss, how do we shut this U.S. Meat Animal Research Center in Clay Center, Nebraska, under the USDA, the Department of Agriculture? How do we shut it down?
You know, it's not unlike the spotlight being shined on the NIH maternal deprivation studies. Now that the public knows, there's going to be increased pressure from Congress and from the public to shut these places down, these government-funded houses of horrors down.
Well, Nathan, I know Mercy for Animals is going to be all over that one. Jane Unchained, theirturn.net, Farm Sanctuary, all the organizations. PETA, we are all going to join together to end this horror. It keeps me up at night, gives me nightmares to think that my tax dollars that I work so hard as a journalist to earn are being used to fund something that I find completely morally abhorrent. To the people who run the USDA's U.S. Meat Animal Research Center, shame on you. How do you sleep at night? Velez-Mitchell for Jane Unchained.